The Developer tool is recognized by many as one of the most popular tools in this application. However, it can be also quite overwhelming. So in this tutorial, we will go through all the different controllers and sliders to make sure that you understand what they do. Now, we have a lot to cover, so let's start right now. And into the Luminar NEO we go, where as usual, we are starting in the catalog module. Now, we have this raw file here, and actually if you want to follow me along and use the same image, just jump into the description of this video, follow the link there, download the sample file, import it into Luminar NEO, and let's start. So with this image, I actually captured this in Montmartre in Paris. It's this beautiful cafe / restaurant, and I thought it will work really well for our tutorial about the Develop Raw tool. Now looking at it, and actually to be able to access the Develop Raw tool, two things have to happen. One, you have to be working with the raw file, or at least the software has to recognize the file as raw file. So here you can see the raw up here in the top right corner. And also when we look at the information panel in a catalog module, it needs to have the raw here. Now this is DNG format, but it may be any other format of your camera, whatever you use, as long as it's raw file. So that's the first thing needs to happen. It has to be raw file. After that, second thing for us to be able to see the Develop Raw tool is the image has to be unedited. So let's say that I go into the Enhance AI, apply it. You will notice that it will apply the enhancement, but it will remove the access to the Develop Raw tool. And the reason is that once finished with the Develop Raw tools, the image is turned into the TIFF file and we are not working with all the data anymore. So you really want to make sure that you do the basic development at the beginning of your editing workflow. So right click on the image, into the adjustments and revert to original, which now we have a raw file and unedited, and we have access to our Develop Raw tool. Just very quickly, when it comes to raw tools in Luminar NEO, there is the Develop Raw and there is the Noiseless Raw. So those two, this one can do the development and this one can remove the noise. But today we are focusing on the Develop Raw tool. Let's open it and let's start. By the way, many of photography educators or Luminar NEO educators believe that this is the one most important tools in the application. And I think there is something about it. You really want to make sure that your raw development is as best as possible. It's like a building stone, because if you end up with overexposed image, or oversaturated, or wrong white balance, or wrong sharpness, then everything else after will just make it worse. And this is where the exact workflow, where you start, where you continue, is really important. And actually to help you to edit and to help you to set this workflow, I have created a full masterclass on raw development. It just came out. If you want to learn more about it, follow the link in the description of this video and master this crucial part of photo editing. Now for us, today we're gonna look at the Develop Raw tool and we're gonna go one by one through all the controllers to understand what they do. So starting from the top, we have the Auto Adjust. This is like a magic button. When you click on it, it scans the image and apply basic development. Unfortunately, at this moment, it's not really perfect yet. You can see that it did okay, but actually you can see that it's still a little bit dark. We have the vignetting and there is too much contrast and it's too deep, so it's not perfect. So what I would use the Auto Adjust for is just quick development to see if the image is worth to be working on. Now to reset it, quickly click on this little icon here and let's continue. So Auto Adjust, good option just to check the image. However, at this moment, I would rather do the adjustments myself. After this, we have the camera profile. What is a camera profile? In a way, it's a preset, but the way I like to call it, it's an interpreter. Now, imagine your camera. You capture an image, and the camera, when it produces the raw file, basically it's a number of numbers or list of numbers, right? So it speaks in a certain language. Then there is the interpreter who translates these numbers to your editing software. And then the editing software is able to show it. So it knows that there is a bright area here and dark area, and it has this color and this tone and so on. Now there is a number of interpreters. And when you click on this drop-down box, you are able to go through them. For example, Adobe Standard is one of them, or Camera Standard, camera portrait, camera clear, and so on. Which profiles are going to be here very much depends on your camera and the camera type. So maybe with your RAW files, you see a shorter list, or maybe you see bigger list. It really depends. Now, if you want to get some additional profiles, I have a full tutorial on how to do that in the description of this video, and you can do it after we finish here. So what you do? Well, by default, there is the Luminar default. Makes sense, right? But there are some others. So let's go through it and see maybe the camera light or camera neutral. Well, let's go for the camera neutral. So we choose the camera profile. Now after this, we have the light and blacks and whites. Why I opened both of them? Well, because this whole section pretty much works with the same thing, and that's the light part of your image. Now to explain these sliders, let's make sure that we have our histogram on. To do that, right-click on your image and select Show Histogram. Click on it until you get to the point where you see just this gray histogram. How it works in very basic, this area of the gray basically showing the values in different parts of your image. Starting all the way from the left, that's where your blacks are. Blacks right here. Then moving on, we have our shadows. Shadows, the darker parts of your image. You can see them here and around. Then we go in the middle, in the midtones. Now we don't have a slider for midtones, but we do have a slider for highlights. Those are the brighter parts of your image, and highlights here. And going all the way towards the right, that's where our whites are. Whites, the extreme bright parts of our photo. And we can adjust those, and we can also adjust the values and shape of our histogram. So let's start nice and slow from the top. Exposure slider, adjust the brightness of your image. It's really that simple. Up, make it brighter, and down, make it darker. And to confirm that, look at the data. If I shift the exposure towards right, it takes the values and shift them towards right, towards whites and highlights. You can see that. And when I go the other way around, when I bring it down, it's taking the data and shifting them towards the shadows and blacks. Again, you can see it on the image. So that's an exposure, really simple. After that, we have the smart contrast. Now, what is contrast? Contrast is the difference between bright parts and dark parts of your image. By increasing the contrast, the brighter parts will get brighter and darker parts will get darker, and that will create contrast. So, well, when we shift the slider up, we adding the contrast. So again, you can see this getting brighter and this getting darker. Looking at the histogram, it also means that we creating gap between the shadows and highlights. Look at it. When I do that, how it's shifting them apart from each other. Cool, right? Now you can reset it by double clicking on the slider and go the other way around, which will remove the contrast. So the bright parts are not as bright anymore, dark parts are not as dark. Our histogram is getting closer to each other, but if you overdo it, you will just make the image very flat. So it's up to you, up to your creative decision, but this is how the smart contrast works. Now it's time to move on to the highlights, shadows, whites, and blacks. If I would be the engineer for Luminar NEO, I would have all these fours in the same bracket or section because they work very much with each other. So highlights, well, again, this part of our histogram and the bright parts of our image. If I take the highlights and increase it, I will make the bright parts brighter, right? Just like that. Now, when I take the highlights and bring it down, I will make the bright parts darker. Now, to show it even better, hit J on your keyboard, and that will give us clipping mask. Now, anything that is red, that is 100% extreme white and it's overexposed. No data there. So, if I increase the highlights, I will make the bright area even bigger. I will just add exposure until it's completely white. And when I go the other way around, I will remove it. So I will bring the details back into our image. And quite often in photography, by bringing the highlights down, you can recover details in the sky. So that's the highlights. After that, shadows. Now shadows, as you know, representing this area of the histogram and also the dark areas of the image, like the darker areas. So similarly with our highlights, with the shadows, when we increase it, we can make the shadows brighter, which often in photography is called opening shadows. Open the shadows. So we take the shadows and bring them up. Or we can also close them by bringing the slider down. So we take in the dark areas already and making them darker. And as you notice by doing that, we're getting lots of blue overlay. and the blue overlay represent the areas which are completely black. Again, no data there, and we kind of trying to avoid that. So ideally, you would have as little overlay as possible. Now, often when it comes to the workflow, you come in and you take the highlights down and you open the shadows a little bit. Now, for different views, looks, or styles, you may want to adjust it differently, but that's usually the starting point. After that, you move into the blacks and whites, where for some reason it's whites and black. I guess just to make fun. When it comes to whites, again, we're looking at the extreme side of our histogram, so we're making just the white parts whiter, and again, bringing just lots of exposure and overexposure to our image. But in general, we do add a little bit of whites, yes, just to add more contrast. And with blacks, we're making our extreme blacks even darker, like really black. And just like with the whites, we just make the extreme and add lots of underexposed areas. But you can add a little bit of blacks. So this is how it works. Usually once you finish with the highlights, shadows, whites and blacks, you add a little bit of contrast and you just shift the exposure based on your liking. Finish with that, finish with the light adjustments. Cool, because it's time to move into the curves. Well, actually, curves as a feature can be as complex as it takes. And in fact, I have a complete tutorial over this feature. It's about 20 or 25 minutes, and we would not be able to cover it here, but you're more than welcome to watch it. Again, I will link it in the description of this video. How it works? Well, we have the white curve, which basically adjusting the brightness in shadows, again, highlights, midtones, blacks and whites. You can do that. And then you can adjust the tones using the color curves, like adding a red or maybe aqua and so on. So don't forget, full tutorial on curves in the description of this video. After this, it's time to look at the color section. In the color tab, we have the white balance adjustments with the presets, eyedropper, temperature, and tint slider. So what do you usually do? Well, usually you jump into the presets and see what is here. As shot is basically the white balance captured with your camera. Then we have a daylight, for example, see how that works, cloudy, and you can go through them and see what works for you, at least like a starting point. So let's say the shade works. After that, you can then jump into the sliders and adjust them based on your liking. Now looking at it, I think it's a little bit too warm and there is definitely too much green tint. So with the temperature slider, if you go crazy all the way towards the right, you add lots of warmth. So moving towards right, warmth. You can actually see it on the color here, right? And moving it the other way around, lots of cool and blue, right? So where were we? Shade. So we say a little bit too much warm, bring it down a little bit. Tint, simply to understand, well, anything on this side will add the green tint, so you can make it even worse, or anything on the other side will add magenta and ultimately remove the green tint. So I quite like the idea. Now looking at it, we still have our clipping mask on, so just hit J again and remove it. After that, the final option for the white balance is an eyedropper. When you click on that, you can select white or gray area on your image, and quite often that does a good job for selecting your white balance. So for example, this house, if I click on it, wow, it did quite good job to select the initial white balance. Now you can try other areas, like let's say the house, and see what it's going to do, or maybe the sky. Yeah, but what it works very well on are gray cards and portrait photography and studio environment. So for that, yeah, just click, select the area, set the white balance and continue. But even with the eyedropper, you can always fine tune it with your sliders. Now it's time to look at saturation and vibrance. Saturation, really easy to understand. It controls the saturation of all your colors. By increasing the saturation, you make all the colors more saturated, just like this. Crazy, right? I mean, my eyes hurting. And the other way around, you're removing it. If you go to extreme all the way down, you will turn it to black and white. So with the saturation slider, you want to be gentle because there's nothing wrong about adding a little bit of saturation, but don't forget that it's easily overdone. In fact, you can use the smart cousin of saturation, which is called vibrance. The vibrance slider ultimately adds saturation, but to the colors that are already not prominent, to the little lower colors. So by increasing it, it just makes it a little bit more gentle. Where you go all the way to vibrance, all the way to 100, it will also be crazy. But on the way there, it can be quite cool, like somewhere around 20. And the other way around also, you can remove the vibrance, But you notice that if we go all the way to -100, it will actually not remove all the colors. So it's just a little more gentle, and I guess smarter too. Finished with the color section, it's time for sharpness and noise reduction. Now for both of them, we could be here for hours to explain it, so I will try to be short and I hope that you will understand. Sharpening, how does this work? Well, the sharpness slider goes as far as individual pixels on your image. It zooms in like crazy and then look for the pixels. And by increasing the sharpening slider, you will be adding contrast between these individual pixels. Brighter pixel, darker pixel, increase the contrast. Now, generally, when you're adjusting sharpness and noise reduction, it's a good idea to be zoom in at least 100% or even more. Now, when I go to 0, you can see that we have a little bit of noise, but not sharpness. When I go all the way up to 100, we will get lots of new noise and lots of sharpening, which will be just a little bit crazy. So you really want to be gentle with the sharpen slider. Under it, we have the radius. Now, bringing it down, the sharpening will be a little bit more gentle. Bringing it up, it will be even stronger. I mean, look at that. That just looks crazy, right? We definitely don't want that. Finally, under it, we have the option of masking. Now, this is really important. Anytime you're applying sharpening, you want to make sure that you're only applying it to the areas which have a texture or details on it. I mean, what's the point to sharpen your skies or this building here? It will just add more noise. And this is where the masking will help us. It will basically make sure that we only sharpen the right areas. And in general, around 80 works really well. So that's the idea of sharpening and masking. After that, it's time to look at the noise reduction. How does it work? Well, noise reduction, working with the noise, right? Really simple. We have the luminosity noise, which is pretty much like a grain in the image, and color noise, which are different specks of green, gray, purple, magenta, and so on. Now, there is no color noise here, but you would basically try to remove it using the color slider. And when it comes to luminosity, the way it works, it look at the image and look at unusual pixels. Pixels that don't belong there. Like there's lots of gray and then there are these white dots. And by increasing the luminosity slider, it is removing the contrast. It is removing the contrast between these pixels. So, one thing to understand here. Luminosity noise reduction remove the contrast between the pixels, and the sharpening slider is increasing it. So ultimately, both of them affect each other. And this is why we have both of them open, because it's really important to find the balance between them, so you don't affect one and each other. How do you usually do it? The workflow, in most cases, is zooming to 100 to 150%. And first, look at the noise. So there is quite lots of noise here, so we're gonna take the luminosity slider. And increase it. Let's see, maybe around 40 looks good. Once finished with that, we then go into the sharpness and adjust the sharpness. Now, quite often we use the rule of 100. It doesn't apply to everything like portraits and so on, but it applies to many situations. So imagine number 100 minus the amount on your luminosity slider. So 100 minus 40 is 60. And that's how much you enter into your sharpening. So in our case, 60 right here. And usually this works quite well with each other. When finished with sharpening, again, don't forget about masking, set it to 80, and that's that. So finish with sharpness and noise reduction. After this, it's time to go into the optics. Let's zoom out and let's see what we have here. First, 3 checks: auto distortion correction, auto fix chromatic aberration, and auto defringe. Even if you don't understand what they do, always make sure they are on. But still, what do they do? Well, auto distortion correction adjusts the distortion. Different lens, different distortion, and this is what will help to fix it. After that, we have the chromatic aberration and defringe. Chromatic aberration, not on this image, but maybe you've seen it before, is that kind of purple or sometimes green edge on your image. And by applying it, it will remove it. Defringe, similar to chromatic aberration, but often showcased as white line or white edge. Ultimately, these 3 things are always on. After that, we have some manual sliders like lens distortion. So if the auto distortion correction didn't help, you can still adjust the distortion using the slider. Looking at our image, you can also notice that we have a little bit of vignette here, right? It's not really perfect. Some lenses just do have the vignette. So to adjust this, we can use the vignette tool. very easily apply it and remove it. And finally, the vignette point, depending on your image, you can adjust the vignette and the vignetting using that as well. So those are the optics. In general, what you do, open, make sure all these are checked on, and if you have a specific vignette, adjust these manual settings. Now it's time for the final tab, the transform. Now I love this auto align option here. It really helps, especially for cityscapes captures. You can just click on it and it will align your photo. How cool is that? Well, if the automatic alignment doesn't help, then you can also adjust the vertical transformation, basically shift it one way or the other. Horizontal, as you can imagine, goes one way or the other. And with the aspect slider, you can basically stretch the image up and down and left and right. So this is it. This is the transform tab and the entire develop raw tool. Once you finish with this, you usually go into the noiseless raw or super sharp AI if needed, and then you continue with the edit. Just like I mentioned, enhance AI, maybe just a quick enhancement there, maybe creative section, little mystical tool, and maybe little fade in matte tool. And now looking at it, oh my God, I would still like to adjust the saturation. Of course, I can do it with any of the other tools, but I would like to do it at the raw level. But the develop raw tool is gone. Still, don't worry, we can go to the top of our editing toolbar, click on edits, and head down here into the raw edits. Here, when you click on the develop raw tool, all the previous enhancements disappear and we will be able to adjust it here. So back to the color where we can take our saturation down a little bit. And when you close the develop raw tool, all the enhancements will come back and you can continue the edit. So there you have it. This is how you use the develop raw tool and all its sliders. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning, how you use the different sliders and controllers is really important for the success of the raw development. There is exact order and a way to do this. And if you want to learn it alongside me, check out my new Develop Raw Masterclass for Luminar NEO. But don't get stuck there. Now on your screen, you should see some of the tutorials I mentioned earlier, like the chromatic aberration or curves. So don't stop here, continue learning, watch another video, and keep moving forward on your photo editing journey.